James here again. Today we're going to be talking about a book you've probably heard of, and that book is Vengeful by V.E.Schwab. This is the sequel to Vicious. It's quite big and it's hardback, so I'm not going to hold it because it's awkward. This is the sequel to Vicious, which is obviously the story of Victor Vale and Eli Ever, two college roommates who decided that it would be a great idea to almost kill themselves in order to get superpowers, and then have a ruck, basically a superhero ruck. And this is the sequel to that, so I can't really tell you much about the plot because obviously it's a sequel and these quick thoughts are generally non-spoiler, but I will tell you it's 5 years later. There's a new menace to the world of superherodom. So basically, like, one of the characters from the first book starts a organization designed to hunt down superheroes, and that is the main plot, is dealing with this superhero fighting organization. There's also a woman called Marcella Riggins, which I really hated that surname. Riggins, it doesn't fit well for me with like the New York mob. Like, is there going to be some guy with the name Riggins high up in a New York mafia family? I don't know, probably not. But anyway, yeah, so Marcella Riggins is like the wife of this mafioso who develops superpowers as well, after her husband tries to burn her to death in a house, because that's what happens when you get involved with the mob. That's not really a spoiler because it happens in like the prologue of this, so whatever. Yeah, so general thoughts. Sequel. A lot of people didn't think there was going to be a sequel because Vicious was released quite a long time ago now. I only read it like last year, I think, so the wait for a sequel for me was not so significantly long. I think it was a sequel that was well deserved. I think it needed to happen. A lot of people said they weren't expecting a sequel because the original wrapped up so well. I think it could have ended with the first one potentially, but I think there was still a lot of open plot threads. Very much so. There's no real finite conclusion with Vicious, and I think the same can be said of Vengeful. Like, I can definitely see where the plot thread is there. Like, I don't know what the deal is with this series because I've heard that V.E.Schwab wanted to do it as a trilogy first of all, and then it was a long time between the first book and the second book. I don't know why, but I hope, I think that the deal is they're not sure about it as a series. They gave it a second book. I think that it was still on the fence. I think they're still curious as to whether or not the series has legs to go for 3, because the conclusion of this, in my opinion, is a solid wrap up point as well. Like, you could end a series here, and it not be an issue, but you could also carry it on. Like, there's definitely room there to expand into a third book. I can see the plot threads there. There's a few little dangly bits, which is good, because the second book in a series, obviously first books in series, I always like to be well-rounded, just in case they don't get a sequel. This one, I'm happy to say the plot was very strong. I was nervous going in because I didn't know how can you do, because the Vicious is very much a cat and mouse game between the two characters. I was worried how they would expand that for a sequel, because cat and mouse games between two characters of equal power, I mean, you do it once, great. You do it again, it's kind of the same deal. But this book wasn't all about that. It took a different tact with it, and I was very happy with that. The writing style is strong. It's very fast to read. Like, I read it in the course of a week, I think. But it's long. It's like 600 pages. But I read it over the course of about a week. So good. very quick to read through, very easy. The characters are top notch still. I think Victor Vale is like one of those perfect examples of like a bad guy that you can root for. Like no one in this book is a good person really, and that's not to say that there's shades of grey. It's to say that they're all pieces of shit, but one of them you root for because he's more charismatic. I don't know. Like Victor Vale is an interesting character because obviously his whole thing is that he's so self-serving. He's a very selfish character. But the reason we like him is because the things that would benefit him temporarily align with what is good for us with a bigger perspective. Like he like the take on Vicious is that Eli is the biggest piece of scum, and Victor is also a big piece of scum. But because Victor wants to destroy Eli, we're sort of all right with it. We want him to win. But with Vengeful, like for a long time, I was like, well, Victor's goals now really don't serve any sort of greater good, and I'm not that keen on him succeeding. But she pulls that back. V.E.Schwab pulls that back, and like it's interesting, like how you can become involved in this character who morally is like awful, but you can still root for him. And one thing that V.E.Schwab does really, really well, and I want to make a longer video about this because I think it's just done superbly here, is a ticking clock mechanic. A lot of stories will have a ticking clock plot device, just to wrap the story up in like a finite time frame. Like, like what's a good example? Like I guess the Mission Impossible films would be a good example. Like we have to do this heist on this day, otherwise it's game over. Ocean's 11, like a lot of heist films are like that with the ticking clock. This book does it as well. But what she does really well is like she establishes the main, like it jumps around in time, past and present basically. We don't get future looks. But basically the way it's set up is the main plot line is always titled like 3 weeks ago for the most part of the book. So we already know that we're heading towards some sort of event like some sort of event that is happening now that we're viewing context for 3 weeks in the past. And then all the rest of the stuff, all the character development stuff is handled in flashbacks, which take place like 15, 20 years before. And we get a lot more characterization in those flashbacks of some of the characters. Especially Eli, I think, is characterized better in this than he is in Vicious. It kind of gives him a more sympathetic edge, which is good. We do get introduced to some other characters that I wasn't so fond of, like Marcella Riggins. Is like, she is a classic plot device character in that she is just there to be a combustible element to bring Eli and Victor back together for the sequel. Yeah, there's really like her arc is almost non-existent because like she starts off wanting power and then she gets power like immediately and then just sort of flatlines as a character like straight away. She doesn't really grow or develop or change. She just is an antagonist. Like she's just an antagonistic force to bring the two people we give a shit about together. We also get introduced to June, who's like a shapeshifter EO, who is, I don't know, she's just sort of mucking about with Victor's stuff. But I think June was a weaker character than she could have been. There are hints that she's more in depth than we think, but in this book she's not developed particularly well at all. We get the very sort of basic beginnings of an arc. We get a hint that something's happened in her past, but we don't get like chapters from June's past. We don't get flashback chapters for her really. So I think that is one of the plot threads definitely that is left open for the third book. and I would be interested in seeing that. But in this book, didn't work for me so much. June, I'm not fascinated with. It's just there, and there was like this other guy, this other guy who literally got introduced to the story to undermine a weakness in Marcella Riggins. I was like, this guy has no fucking arc. Like this guy, literally, this guy just sits there in the corner in a suit and is just a problem to be overcome by Victor and Eli. Like, what is the point? Like, because the rules, like, I understand why she did it, because the V.E.Schwab has done a really good job of building this world and established what powers people get and how they get their powers, and that they only get one. There's no character with more than one power in this series. So, in order to make the Marcella the character that she wanted to make her and give her the power she wanted, but still have her viable as a threat, she had to create this other character with this other power, but didn't really have time to develop him into anything. So he is just there. So that I wasn't too fond of. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Like, I enjoyed it as much as Vicious. I think I did enjoy Vicious more just because I think it was a bit more novel of a concept. Novels. But Vengeful really is a good sequel. I think it sets up things well for a potential third book. It wraps up a lot of stuff from the first book that could be wrapped up. So it's a solid. It is an absolutely perfect middle entry to a trilogy, and a potentially solid ending to a duology if a third book doesn't happen, or doesn't happen for like 10 years. I don't know. But yeah, that's it. That's my quick thoughts on Vengeful by V.E.Schwab. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, do all of that, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.